Hey everyone, this is Dr. Jeritan, and I'm a medical doctor with a very keen interest in philosophy and theology. And I'm here right now to demolish 10 YouTube objections to the ontological argument. Now, before we start, I'd like to tell you about my new ebook, which has just been released, titled God in the Teeth of Suffering, which gives new insights to the philosophical and theological aspects of the problem of evil. This book is currently ranking number 5 in Amazon's bestsellers list under Christianity. I've included a link to my book in the description below, so you can chew on that as well if you'd like, to your heart's content. That said, without any further delay, let's get started. Alright, what I'm going to defend is my own modification of Alvin Plantinga's ontological argument, which is itself a modification of St. Anselm's version of the ontological argument. What you see right now is Plantinga's version of the ontological argument. Now, don't worry if you have no idea about it. I just want you to have a look at the key terms which I have highlighted in red. So first, let's define our terms. Number one term is the word possible. When we use the word possible, what do we mean by it? We are talking about metaphysical possibility and metaphysical impossibility. First, what is metaphysically possible? A proposition that is both logically possible and can be actualized. Again, what do we mean by the word logical possibility? Logical possibility means that something can be thought about without generating a logical self-contradiction. And what do we mean by the word actualized? Well, something is actualizable if that thing can exist when the world is described in a particular way. Let me give you 3 examples. Elephants flying in the sky. Can flying elephants be thought about without generating a logical contradiction? Yes. Could flying elephants exist if the laws of physics were different and enabled elephants to fly? Well, yes. So elephants flying in the sky is a metaphysically possible scenario. Likewise, a tortoise running faster than the speed of light or unicorns existing, all these are metaphysically possible, even though they are not actually possible given the laws of nature which we have in this world, but they are metaphysically possible in that they are both logical and can be actualized. Second is the term metaphysically impossible. What do we mean by that? A proposition that either involves a logical self-contradiction or a proposition that doesn't involve a self-contradiction but nevertheless cannot be actualized. Let me give you examples of propositions that involve a logical self-contradiction. Number 1, square, circle. Well, a square cannot be a circle. 2, a rounded rectangle. A rectangle can never be round. I mean, that's a logical contradiction. Similarly, the term married bachelors. A bachelor is by definition unmarried. So you cannot logically have a married bachelor. What about examples of propositions that don't involve a logical contradiction but still nevertheless cannot be actualized? Well, there's one example that Plantinga gives. The prime minister is a prime number. Well, even though there is no logical self-contradiction between a prime minister and a prime number, still it cannot exist in any description of the world. Hence, it is metaphysically impossible. Now coming to our next term, possible worlds. Okay, what are possible worlds? It is defined as a metaphysically possible description of the way in which reality is and could have been. In other words, they are logically possible and actualizable descriptions of the way in which reality is and could have been. As such, we will call them CHB worlds, could have been worlds. So what are CHB worlds? CHB worlds are logically possible and actualizable descriptions of the way in which reality is and could have been. So that is the definition of a CHB world. Now, question. Does a CHB world include the actual world? Yes, it does, because the actual world is also a logically possible and actualizable description that has in fact been actualized for real. So by definition, this world is also a CHB world. Now someone might object and say, what do you mean reality could have been? Reality is the way it is. There's no other way for reality to could be otherwise, right? Well, in response to that, yes, reality is the way it is. But the point is that reality needn't have been this way. Reality could have been different. This is modal logic, and the ontological argument is an argument from modal logic. Besides, I'm not saying that there are other descriptions of reality that actually exist somewhere. These are just descriptions of the way reality is not, but could have been. If you ask me why do I want to even talk about could have been worlds when in reality they are not even there, well, I'm talking about it because it is an exercise in modal logic, and with it, we can actually arrive at the conclusion that God exists in the actual world. How does that happen? You're going to see in a few minutes. Our last definition is that of a maximally great being. A maximally great being is defined as an all-powerful, all-knowing, and morally perfect being existing in every CHB world. That is the full definition of a maximally great being. Now, how do we know what a maximally great being should be? Answer: it is based on our intuitive coherence of the qualities that make up maximal greatness. So let's ask ourselves the question: is it greater to be powerful or impotent? Obviously, it's greater to be powerful than to be impotent. Is it greater to be wise or ignorant? Well, it's greater to be wise. Is it greater to be morally good or morally bad? It's greater to be morally good. Therefore, a maximally great being would have these three qualities, namely strength, knowledge, and moral goodness, to its maximum limit. Also note that as part of the definition of a maximally great being, we have to ask ourselves the question, is it greater to exist necessarily or to exist contingently? In other words, we are asking, is it greater to have independent existence or to be dependent on something else for its existence? Well, intuitively, independent existence is clearly greater than dependent existence. And so a maximally great being ought to have necessary existence. Now notice key points here. We are not asking, is it greater to exist than to not exist? Because existence is obviously not a quality. What we are asking is, what type of existence is greater? Types of existence are qualities. Is necessary existence greater or is contingent existence greater? And clearly, a necessary existence and independent existence would be greater than a contingent or a dependent existence, and therefore a maximally great being, if it exists, would have to have necessary existence. That is, it has to be existing in every CHB world, could have been worlds. Another point to note is that we are not assuming prior existence before ascribing qualities to the maximally great being. We are framing a definition of a maximally great being which, if it exists, should exist as a necessary being in order to be called maximally great. So that is what we are doing. So quick recap of definitions before we actually get into the argument. Number one, when we say the word possible, we mean metaphysically possible. And when we use the word possible worlds, which Plantinga used, I have used the word CHB worlds, and by which I mean metaphysically possible descriptions of the way in which reality is and could have been. And when we use the word maximally great being, we are defining it as an all-powerful, all-knowing, and morally perfect being existing in every CHB world. Now, with that in hand, have a look at my modification of Alvin Plantinga's ontological argument. First, we are defining what an MGB is without assuming its existence. An MGB is defined as an all-powerful, all-knowing, morally perfect being existing in every CHB world. Second, we are introducing the metaphysical possibility of its existence by saying that the proposition that MGB exists is both logically possible and actualizable. The statement MGB exists involves no logical self-contradiction and can exist in a possible description of reality. And that's it. The rest of the steps will logically follow and lead to the conclusion that God exists. Let me show you how. Premise 3 says that since the statement MGB exists is both logically possible and actualizable, therefore a maximally great being must exist in at least one metaphysically possible description of the way in which reality could have been, which is what we mean by a CHB world. Premise 4 states that a being that exists in all CHB worlds, which is part of the definition of MGB according to premise 1, cannot only exist in one CHB world. If it exists in one, then by definition it has to exist in all CHB world. That simply follows by the definition of MGB. To put it differently, how can a being which, if it exists, is supposed to exist in every CHB world, exist only in one CHB world? It should either exist in all CHB worlds or no CHB world. And for it to not exist in any CHB world, the atheist will have to show that the concept of MGB is logically impossible, which would amount to a defeater of premise 2. And then premise 5 states that if MGB exists in all CHB worlds, then it has to exist in the actual world, since this world is also a CHB world as we have defined. Premise 6, this means that CHB exists in the actual world. Conclusion, therefore CHB exists in the actual world. Now, this is an airtight and valid argument with no circular reasoning or non sequiturs. So, this ends part 1 of my video. Do not miss out on my second part, the link to which is in the description below, which refutes the 10 YouTube objections to this version of the ontological argument that I have presented. Thank you.